Sergeant Reardon's here. We can start now.
It's official.
It's official. We're protected.
All right. I guess we'll bring the work session to order. First item on the agenda, comprehensive plan update, future land use discussion. Staff presentation by Cody Bird.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. This is Cody Bird, Planning Director. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I would ask throughout the presentation and discussion, if the board members have any questions, if you could speak directly into your microphone. It's a little hard to hear on the outside here from the remote locations. So just appreciate that help and coordination. So I'd like to start by doing just a quick kind of overview. Many of you know we're working on a comprehensive plan update for the town. The comp plan was last updated in 2014. And at that time, Wellington's population was around 6,000 residents, and we're currently approaching 11,000 residents. So a lot has changed in a fairly short amount of time. And as the town is continuing to grow, it's best to continue to evaluate our circumstances and plan proactively for the future. What we've got is a 2014 plan that has some solid bones to it. What we're trying to do with this new update for the comprehensive plan is to really kind of flesh that out and provide more of a community vision for a 20-year look. Comprehensive plans are long range in nature. Excuse me. They're long range in nature. So this is creating a 20-year plan for the community. And a lot changes in 20 years. So we know we have to be flexible with this plan. But what if this is establishing is kind of the base and the vision for what that might look like 20 years from now. Change occurs slowly. And so we need to be proactive in managing our resources to meet the intended future that we're laying out in our comprehensive plan for 2040. Just to give you kind of a little bit of background, the town staff and working with a professional firm to guide this process has been involved in stakeholder engagement, public outreach. We've evaluated the existing comprehensive plan to kind of see what should stay, what should go, what should be modified to fit our current circumstances. We've been working on this for about a year now. So we've had quite a bit of back and forth on some drafts, some ideas. Some have stayed, some have gone. But what we're really distilling down is kind of the very first draft of that total comprehensive plan that we plan on releasing to the public for public comments here in about a week. What we wanted to do tonight was give our board of trustees just kind of an introduction to that and focus on some of the key elements of the plan, knowing that there's more details in the full draft, but wanted to give you a good kind of starting point for some discussion. So I'm going to start a screen share here. And as soon as I get the right mechanism in place, there we go. Can you see the shared screen?
Yes.
Thank you. So what I'd like to share with you tonight for discussion purposes is the chapter of the plan that focuses on the future land use. And that is the future land use component is a map of our total growth management area that the town sees itself growing into over 20 years. It also identifies what those land use categories might look like, what our residential needs are, what our non-residential needs are, commercial activities. It also starts to reflect the bones of our transportation plan, looking at what are the arterial corridors, where are the areas of more intense development going to occur, and then we use that to program what our transportation needs are going to look like in terms of a road network, pedestrian connections, multi-purpose paths and trails, and how they interconnect the various types of land uses. The overall comprehensive plan is a guiding document. It's not regulatory in nature. It provides a vision. And the future land use map is one of those elements it's easy for everyone to latch onto because it's very visual in nature. You can see it, you can see what the intent is. But it's, as I mentioned, it's not a regulatory tool. It's a guide. So we expect it to change over time. This is kind of the first draft on what that looks like based on some of the public input that we've received, stakeholder engagement, and some of our kind of planning knowledge of how things typically develop in a small town. So I'd like to share the map with you. Excuse me. As you know, Wellington is growing. To give you some perspective, and this is another chapter in the plan, but Wellington is currently at about 11,000 people, and based on growth projections for how the town is currently developing, looking at the greater region, the Fort Collins metropolitan area, the growth pressure the Front Range is experiencing, and the overall state demographic projections for how the state is going to grow. We know that the Front Range is a booming area, and there's a lot of demand for growth in this corridor here on the Front Range. And Fort Collins Metro is a very desirable area for people outside the state wanting to move to and live in. So we are anticipating that growth pressure is going to continue for the coming years. Based on those projections and based on Wellington's historic growth rates, we're anticipating that Wellington will achieve within the 20-year horizon of the comp plan. We're probably looking at a population around 35,000 residents. And so if that comes true, and we've got 35,000 residents in 20 years, what the future land use map does is it helps us identify where those residents are going to go and where the commercial, the retail, the businesses, the service industries, where they're going to go to support that population base. I know this is very small, and I'm going to zoom in here in just a moment. I'm just framing the context here. So the map element that you can see really small is the overall growth management area for that 20-year look. And the other segments of this chapter, and we'll go through them a little bit more detail here in a minute, we identify categories, which are the future land uses, and then we describe what the intent or desire behind those categories are, and we identify, and I'll zoom in a little bit, it identifies the desire and intent, and it starts to look at what are the types of uses that would be consistent with the description of what that land use category would look like. And then it also provides us with a couple of examples here for how much density we expect to develop for that given category, intensity and the existing zoning. This is something that we'll look at a little bit closer. The town obviously adopts a separate zoning map that identifies specific land uses for properties that are within the town. The future land use map looks beyond the town limits into the areas that will likely become part of the town. So it's a little bit more visionary than just our zoning map. And to give you a little bit closer example here, you can see for the low density residential, density range is 2 to 6 dwelling units. That's currently our R1 and R2 zones in our public sector, which is going to fall in most of these. But that just gives you an example of kind of what the density range would look like for each of these examples. And it increases in density as you get into more dense residential, and intensity is a way of measuring for commercial uses how much commercial floor space is on any given property. So FAR is floor area ratio, and I can answer any questions about that as we go along. But so that's kind of the context under which this map is set up. And now I'm going to zoom in a little bit more to the map itself and highlight some of these critical areas. I'll start at kind of the town as it exists today and get you oriented with a kind of a frame of reference. So you can see the light dashed area is the current town limits. And you can see the street network that's laid out on this map. It shows you pretty clearly where the roads are. I'll zoom in just a little bit further. And so you can see our interchange here in Highway 1, and here's the curve of Highway 1 going south. So you can see that most of that area is identified as a single type of land use. It's kind of our low density residential. Just to kind of frame some perspective for you, communities like Buffalo Creek, Wellington Point, Viewpoint, some of our existing neighborhoods, those three neighborhoods are in and around the ballpark of 3 dwelling units per acre. So just to give you a kind of frame of reference on what the densities look like, that 3 dwelling units per acre reflects the total land area, less the street rights of way, less the common areas, the open space, the parks, and then it gives you a per houses per acre is what we refer to as dwelling units per acre. So that should give you just a frame of reference for what those areas look like. In the kind of what we call Old Town, the older residential areas in and around the downtown, those are closer to 5 dwelling units per acre in some areas. Some areas are less than that, but it's a little bit more dense as the lots are smaller, smaller setbacks, smaller houses. There's just more units in a smaller area. So that gives you a little bit of idea as to what those categories might look like. And then some of the higher density residential areas, this orange area, there's existing townhomes in these areas. There's apartments on the east side of the highway, some condos further south. Those are closer to the 6 to 8 dwelling units per acre for some of those developments. So you can kind of know when we say medium density, 6 to 12, it's reflecting more of those kind of compact condo association, townhome type of developments, and then any rental apartments like we have in Wellington Downs. So that's kind of the basic framework for the residential. And then you can see some of the red areas are expected future commercial areas. Green is open space. Obviously, you can see there's some existing open spaces identified. This color here, bluish, is light industrial or industrial type of scale of development. And then this other color that's more purplish in nature, I believe, is what we're identifying as mixed use, which would be a range of land uses from allowing some residential, encouraging commercial use, encouraging intermixing of uses. So we might have offices and neighborhood scale service industries like dry cleaning, restaurants, coffee shops, things of that nature, intermixed with a various range of housing types. So a little more density. You might see loft apartments in this area. And those more intense areas there for mixed use really help support the businesses by keeping the residents close to those businesses where they can walk to them, be supported by the businesses and vice versa. And that's kind of different from the more red traditional commercial types of areas that are really more automobile oriented. You drive there, you pick up your goods, your wares, and then you drive to another location. So that's kind of the key distinguishing feature between the commercial and their mixed use. You can see we do have a different designation for the downtown core. That's our existing Cleveland Avenue corridor. And surrounded by this other color, this is what we're calling our downtown neighborhood. So these are the residential units that support the downtown. And then the purplish kind of color here are what we're identifying as civic uses. So of course, all of our school sites are predominantly what you're seeing here, and future school sites. You see a block down here that we anticipate some cooperation or collaboration with CSU for their RDEC Center. So those are kind of the general categories. Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this green area that is our ag designation. So these are areas that are within the town's 20-year growth management area that we don't anticipate a significant development intensity on those properties. We really anticipate those to remain more agricultural or open space in nature within the 20-year horizon. We know that may change down the road, but for the short term, we don't see the town's growth pressure impacting those areas with a significant scale of development. But we do anticipate that changing over time, and so it's good to identify them now in the short term, we would anticipate and encourage keeping those spaces open or ag for the foreseeable future. So that frames kind of the general context here. And I wanted to spend just a moment to highlight a couple of other distinguishing features of the future land use map. As I mentioned, the boundary you see here with the thick dashed line is the proposed 20-year growth management area, or GMA. This growth management area that we're identifying is largely consistent with the already adopted GMA that we have today. There are a couple of areas where we felt it was worthy of looking at expanding that just a little bit for some reasons. And those areas that we've identified for possible expansion and inclusion are highlighted in this diagonal black line through some of the properties. So here you can see on the southern end of town, this area is currently CSU RDEC Center, but we anticipate as the town continues to grow south, seeing some more intense development around the interchange here at County Road 58, or a future interchange perhaps, that scale of development might want to change. It could be that CSU wants to do a different scale of development for their purposes, in which case the town of Wellington would have services that could be extended to support that. So as we're anticipating 20 years worth of growth and change, we felt it was prudent to include this area as an area where the town may need to extend services in the future. Similar to that, this is Highway 1, and this dashed area or diagonal shaded area is Cottonwood Shores. Town does not expect a significant change in the density or the scale of development there, but we know from past experience as planners, as some of those areas that develop with private septic systems, over time, when those systems start to fail and there are municipal services readily available, it's not uncommon for those areas to request services from the town to be able to support the continued use of that land. And so we're not actually proposing that we change anything in Cottonwood Shores, but we do anticipate that over the next 20 years, it's possible that residents of that neighborhood may request sewer services in the future. And so what we're showing here is just forward thinking that if and when that day comes, Wellington is planning to be able to provide those services if needed. So we are showing that within our growth management area because Wellington would be poised to provide those services, and there's really no other municipal level services that could support that area that's not Wellington. So we thought it was prudent to include that looking forward, knowing that we should be ready to provide that service if needed. And then similarly, the last couple of areas are along our western boundary. Again, you can see the prior GMA is this kind of light shaded area, and it didn't include some of these pockets of land. And again, thinking 20 years down the road, those are areas that the town may need to be able to provide services in. And so we're preparing for that today, for that possibility. And so we did propose kind of squaring these off. No other municipality or service provider is going to be able to serve those areas because of the topography in Wellington's current geographic area. So if those areas need municipal services in the future, it would likely come from Wellington. We want to be able to be prepared for providing those services if needed. But again, in the short range, these new areas that we've brought in for the most part, we're anticipating that those would develop or remain as agricultural or open space areas for the long range look of this plan for 20 years. We did include a little bit north of of Owl Canyon Road as well. It doesn't make sense typically to have a boundary line on the roadway where one side is developing different from the other side of the roadway when the services are available. So again, we anticipate the area north of Owl Canyon Road there in the middle section, where in the 2014 plan, the town already anticipated the town would grow north of Owl Canyon Road someday. We're just saying that that's likely to happen along that entire corridor and not just two ends of it. So we felt this was appropriate to include Again, we're showing it as primarily ag with maybe some commercial opportunities at County Road 9, which would draw Cattle Canyon Road traffic back into Wellington core to support the existing community. So that's kind of the basic nutshell for what our future land use is, or what we're proposing as part of our comprehensive plan. And I've got a couple more details I wanted to share, but I also wanted to not spend the whole night talking. So that's a bit of information to digest. Are there questions or comments that I can answer for the board?
I mean, it's a lot of information to go through. I know there was a steering committee and there was public comment. I know, John, are you on that?
Yes, myself and trustee Kenny were both on the steering committee. I don't believe this has gone to public comment, but the steering committee did comment on this portion of the document already.
Yeah, and that's correct. I'm sorry. Thank you, Trustee Gator and Mayor Pro Tem for mentioning the steering committee, because I meant to thank them for their service, and I kind of got lost and jumped into the plan. But we did have a steering committee of 6 members of the community, and they were very helpful in kind of reviewing and analyzing some of the public comments that we received from our outreach efforts, and helped reflect and refine kind of those desires that we heard from the community in this future land use map. And it is a draft. We know that there may still be some changes that need to be made to this, but our steering committee was very helpful in kind of categorizing some of the concerns we heard from the community and helping get those concerns and comments reflected in the future land use sections.
Okay.
A few comments from me to kind of the process. And there's a significant process that came from both the firm and from staff's perspective, but kind of my point of view and some of the feedback that were provided. The things that stuck out to me the most was kind of identifying who is coming to Wellington and how will they enter Wellington. Either current I-25 access, or potentially within the next 20 years, what other access points from I-25 might be available. With our current interchange, for example, we lost a lot of potential commercial property based on current low density housing. And in hindsight, looking back, it would have been more beneficial to the community to maintain some of those high visibility and traffic areas for commercial use. Now, at this point, we have that same opportunity where we're looking at the future, where potentially people are entering Wellington, where those high traffic patterns might occur based on major landmarks like the new school and Highway 1 traffic and new interchanges potentially. And if we had the opportunity in the past to say, this is where our high traffic areas would be, wouldn't it make sense to make those commercial areas? And to support those commercial areas, wouldn't it make sense to have higher density housing in order to keep Wellington a cost-effective type of community with affordable options? How would that be accomplished? I mean, these are just a few of the topics that went into a map like this. I know me and other steering members had a printout, thanks to staff, of the entire town and this extended GMA area, where we wrote on it and we said, this is where you come to Wellington. What would you want to see when you drive down the street? We wrote notes everywhere. We said, you know, where would parks be great? Where would my family like to travel? How would we get across town on bikes? We went over every scenario we could think of. And then with that, with the professional instruction and additional input of consolidating that data, that's where this map output occurred. So a lot of this, of course, is based on that vision. It's not in this lot, in this spot, I would expect multi-family 8 units per building. That's not the point of this. It's just kind of the vision and idea of what potentially Wellington could be in such a long time frame, with the insight of saying, if we could do this over again and we're looking at this area, what would make the most sense and be the most beneficial to all of Wellington? Unfortunately, we're not seers of the future, although that would be fantastic if that were the case. But I think with the knowledge we received, the feedback from the community and the extra potential for additional feedback from the community, we came up with a map that kind of consolidates all those thoughts. And the fact that a map could hold so much data is amazing to me, but I'm really happy with the result. And again, there's more that can happen with it, but that's kind of the process as I experienced it. So I've seen this in many stages, from the sticky note arrows, drawing on a map, all the way to many iterations till it was all consolidated in one view like this. So that's kind of how the process worked. But it's been a pleasure to be a part of it. So I've really appreciated being on the steering committee.
Okay, thank you. Any other board comments?
So I do have a couple of concerns, and I don't know where this is coming from, because I know that there's a lot, and this has been a constant theme in the steering committees, and I brought up this concern, is that there's a very consistent theme of we need to increase higher density. And I think specifically like the entire downtown core is like a focus to make that a higher density area. And really, I hear from citizens all the time that they don't want to lose that small town feel. They don't want to become that giant Fort Collins with all these apartments everywhere. So it's a little concerning to me, and maybe I just haven't seen all of the data, but I keep hearing in the steering committees that, well, no, we want higher density. That's what the community wants, but that flies in the face of what I've heard from members of the community. So it is a little concerning to me, the amount of really this higher density. I understand the comments that you shared that, well, if we're going to get to 35,000 population, this is what we have to put that in place. But we're the ones who set that. That's not a given. It's not that, well, if by 2040 Wellington is not 40,000, 35,000 people, the world explodes. We can choose to say we don't want to be 35,000. We're going to go more of a lower density, which is generally what I hear from the citizens. And if the issue is, well, we can't support the commercial that the citizens want without the higher density, then we need to explain that to them to see, well, does that change the feedback? So the concern I have is that, while I understand we're looking at longer view, I don't feel that in a lot of cases, this actually does represent what I have heard from members of the community. I know there are some that have said, yes, we would like to see this, but overwhelmingly, when I look at the changes in density that are proposed here, it does not match what I've heard from members of the community.
Are you referring to the downtown neighborhood area?
Downtown specifically, but even just the amount of medium density that we're seeing added into the surrounding areas as you get outside of town, specifically downtown for sure is a big concern. But then as you get outside of that as well, just looking at a lot more apartments and larger density units versus the lower density that kind of characterizes what Wellington is.
Okay.
So that was one. And then I also had a concern with, or a question, I guess, more so. I know that there was a shift that was made to say that houses of worship would be more placed in residential, which I think is something that a lot of them have said they would like to see. But the concern I have is that going to cause problems if there are existing houses of worship that are in a commercial area and they want to retain that property and expand upon it? Is that going to become something where they now have to get special permits? So I think that's something that needs to be kept in mind as well. I agree they should be in more residential areas, and I think that's a good thing, but at the same time, I want to make sure that we're not going to be creating a problem for those that currently exist in a commercial area that choose not to move to a different area.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Trustee Yuki.
It's okay. Something that I was confused about, and we talked in the steering committee, and I think it's worth mentioning right now regarding the medium density. We have excluded any high density, just as a note, but medium density in here for the uses, this is what I think is important to say. Uses are primarily single-family duplexes, townhomes, live and work units, accessory dwelling units, cottage courts, apartments, and condominiums. So when we look at other existing medium density areas within Wellington, they are not all like condo areas. There's generally a mix, but the overall average of dwelling units is between 6 and 12. So if there's an entire huge block of land that's determined to be orange, that doesn't mean that it's entirely only multifamily units. it could be single-family houses on one side that then turn into duplexes and then potentially more larger multifamily units. And that'll be important when we get further along this plan and we use this as an archetype for what we do regulatory to determine what we want those neighborhoods to look like. And then that's where the important part of the planning commission to review all those site plans and those development plans and to come over to the board. So that was something I was confused about. So I did want to clear that up. And that was very eloquently explained to me before and made me rest at ease a little bit more. The other point I do want to mention is that the character of a town, the small town feeling, comes with attitude, not with more affordable housing. I'm a single mom. I have to afford housing, and multifamily housing, higher density is something that's more affordable for our residents. So to exclude that or to say that that shouldn't be part of our town when that has been a common feedback from our community really concerns me. I want to make sure that Wellington is that friendly family small town feel and that people can afford to live here comfortably. And so that's really important to me. And that's similar to a lot of feedback that we've gotten from community members as well. So that's my feedback on the medium density piece. I just felt worth mentioning.
Quick side note also, Mr. Byrd, just the Wellington West, on the medium density map, that did not get adjusted to match the top map where that was initially slated as medium density. So if you guys just want to make sure that gets updated before that rolls out to the public, because otherwise you're going to have people in Wellington West asking why they are being considered medium density. So I know it got fixed in the main map, but when you look under the medium density portion, it's actually still highlighted in orange.
Okay, thank you for pointing that out, Trustee Gator. I know we corrected the large map. I don't know that we were able to update the small maps just yet because we're trying to minimize the number of times we change them. But thank you for pointing that out. I'll make sure that's reflected on the final.
I'd like to make, this is Trustee Whitehouse. I'd like to make a couple comments. I really appreciate the input from those on the steering committee, Trustee Gator and Trustee Kinney. I mean, it's good to see the perspective because while certainly I was aware this was going on, you are again kind of fleshing out what's happened. So I appreciate that. Mr. Byrd, what sort of, obviously it's going to be rolled out publicly. What could you give an outline of what sort of future milestones are, how the review process, could you help outline that as we go through the next few months, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of just an opportunity for the Board of Trustees to get kind of the first blush on one of the major components of the comprehensive plan, and to give you an opportunity to kind of start thinking about that, formulate some questions for staff, and I can get back to you as needed on any of those. But the full draft plan is proposed to be presented next week at the Board of Trustees meeting. I'll be presenting the draft document, and it'll be included in your packet. It's really going to be presented at that meeting next week, and we're at the same time we'll be posting it on our website and asking the public to review it, read through it, digest some of the information, and then provide feedback to us. And us being the steering committee, staff, our professional services firm, Logan Simpson. We're going to be asking the public to spend a little bit of time thinking through this and giving us some very candid feedback. The website that, of course, we'll use the town's website to post this, but it's also going to include a link to a digital platform called Conveo. It's an online tool. The name is not critical, but it's Conveo. And it's a tool we're using to capture comments directly on the plan document. So if you see a picture that doesn't make sense, you can comment on that picture. It doesn't have to be like a memo saying, here's my list of pages where I thought there was a question. If there's a word that's not understood, you can comment directly on it. If you have questions about a future land use, you can comment directly on the map. So we're really using that tool to give the public as easy of access to the document itself, to give us their thoughts and feedback, and then staff with the steering committee will evaluate those comments and see how we can include them in the final draft version that will be republished for kind of a final round of comments. We anticipate the draft plan to be available to the public for comments for a month or month and a half. We really want to make sure the public has an opportunity to read through this, think through it, and provide the feedback that we're seeking. And then it'll take a couple of weeks for staff and the steering committee to kind of evaluate those comments and put it into a final draft version that will then be published for the Planning Commission to consider, and it will come back before the Board of Trustees in a final version hopefully for adoption. But we will, of course, will still continue to take public comments up until the board adopts a final product. So we anticipate this kind of concluding in 2 to 3 months' time, with the end product being hopeful adoption of the plan update by the Board of Trustees.
Okay.
I know we're working on trying to do a town hall so that we can just to go over this with public. Are we going to make it a point to make sure that that happens within that 6 weeks or so, that that's open for public comment? Awesome. Thank you.
Any
Um,
comments,
could-
questions? Go ahead.
Mayor Pro Tem or one of the trustees, if there was a comment from the audience, we couldn't see what that was. Was there an answer to the question? Trustee Gator asked a question and we weren't sure what the response was.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Yes, Patty gave me the double thumbs up that yes, we
Okay.
will be working to get that town hall happening before that public comment period closes.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, any further comments, questions, concerns? All right. Move to the next item. Initiative and referendum discussion. Brad?
Bear with me for a minute. As most of you are aware, I'm an old dog and you're teaching me new tricks. So let's see if I can make this work. I want to do is share screen, but I'm not able to. Let's see.
Help's on the way, bro.
I know. As I said, I'm an old dog. What do I want to do? I get that widened out there. There? I can get that. There we go. Maybe. All right, bear with me. Ha! Man, the old dog thanks you. All right. I was asked by Trustee Jerome to put together a presentation just generally on the town's ability to alter statutory initiative and referendum rights. Initiative and referendum is, for the most part, is a right that has existed in the Colorado Constitution since the inception of the state. It was adopted initially in 1876 when Colorado became a state. It's always been a power that the people have had to put legislation into the law, into the Constitution. It's been amended occasionally, but between 1876 and 1979, there were no amendments. It's been in place for on an ongoing basis. Ever since we became a state, it was adopted. It's been amended 4 or 5 times since 1979. As a general rule, a referendum allows the citizenry to bring to the voters a question of whether or not a law adopted by the legislative body, this board in this case, whether a law adopted by the legislative body should be challenged. An initiative allows the voters to actually take matters to start their law. They initiate the law. Um, as the town is aware, or the board is aware, the town saw a recent initiative that has been working its way through the courts in the last year or so, which has prompted some of the questions as to whether or not the town should consider adopting some sort of limitations on whether or not on initiative and referendum rights. And in front of you is the quote from one of the leading Colorado cases that recognizes that one of the guarantees that while this is a fundamental right, there is an ability for the legislature to adopt rules surrounding the initiative referendum rights. As a general rule, the Wellington Municipal Code is silent on the topic of initiative and referendum. We do have adopted the Colorado Municipal Election Code. The initiative and referendum code is the next following article in that. It's Article 11. And we have nothing in our code that addresses initiative and referendums, which means we follow the Constitution and the state law. Article 11 of Title 31 addresses initiative referendums, and that's how we have governed or been addressed the issues that have come before us in recent litigation and in the recent initiated action. As a general rule, the initiative and referendum rights for municipalities are provided for in Section 9, Article 1 of Article 5 of the state constitution. That then is translated out or defined better at Title 31 of Article 11, Section 101 of the Colorado statutes. If you look at 3111-102, what it provides is that 3111 governs municipal initiatives and referendum unless there are contrary provisions that are put in place by the town by ordinance, which the town could do. Now, that's not uniform. They can't, for example, prohibit initiatives and referendums, but we can adopt procedures to govern, in some cases, the initiative and referendum rights and how they're exercised. If you look at the municipal election code, what it will provide is that, and that's on the right, 5% of the registered electors can initiate or refer a matter to the voters. The Colorado Constitution specifically speaks to municipal rights in paragraph 9, and it would allow the town to increase that percentage from 5% to 10% of the registered electors for a referendum and 15% of the registered election for an initiative. So in order to initiate a law, you could raise that to as high as 15%. Colorado's constitution as to state initiative and referendum items are set at 5%. But as I said, there have been multiple amendments to that provision, including they are now, if you use 5% of the voters, I believe, in the Secretary of State election, recognizing that was not particularly fair to perhaps rural counties. They have included, for example, you could have 2% of everyone from certain Senate districts. There are other provisions the town could add as well. Obviously not Senate districts, but we could certainly regulate it. The primary regulation I would push, if you are inclined to do this, is to raise the percentages. I'm not advocating that by any means. That's the one that is particularly clear, that right to make changes within the Constitution. Making changes otherwise, we followed up with CML. They didn't have a whole heck of a lot of guidance. They did recognize that we could make these changes as set forth in the law, but raising the percentage would be the primary thing I would think the town will want to look at. As a general rule, 5% of the registered electors in Wellington, based upon 7,000 plus voters in the last election, would be, and that I think that's election back, 353 electors signing a petition have the ability to initiate matters on the ballot. If you raised it to 10 for a referendum or for an initiative, that would increase you to 706. 15 would be a little over 1,000. That number of signatures would certainly make it more difficult to put matters on the ballot. And there's certainly there's a school of thought that would suggest that as this is a fundamental right, should you limit it? Um, the other side of that spectrum is that, as a general rule, initiative and referendum matters are generally lightning rods for litigation. They are often not well drafted. They don't think through a good chunk of the requirements. They're often presented to voters somewhat on the fly, and there are voters who, you've probably been on the street corner, at least this is the argument, where someone hands you a petition and you don't think through it, you simply sign it. At least that's the concern. That's the reason that many municipalities have looked at increasing the number of signatures required. It also does lead to traditionally better legislation. The legislation that we saw in the recent initiative issue that was presented to in Wellington, for example, cited to the wrong law. It was a law that had been repealed 3 versions back, actually. We have, in an effort to settle it, suggested that the town would be willing to send the initiated matter, or refer even the initiated matter, on to the voters if we can clean the language up. Initiated matters are if they're simple to put on the ballot, often are poorly drafted. And this one, unfortunately, was not as well drafted as it could be. I think we worked hard toward straightening a lot of the things up, but that's kind of the concern. So the question I leave you with is whether or not the board would like to consider the potential of looking at increasing the percentage of voters required for the initiative referendum. And that's not my decision. That's something I need to put to you guys. And you need to give me some direction. If that's something you're inclined to do, by all means, we can get you some drafting that we put that together.
Mr. March, I have a question for you.
Please.
How would this conversation be different if we were a home rule community?
It would not.
It wouldn't change it at all.
It's still is, whether you're a city or a town, it is still, it's a constitutional right. The Constitution speaks specifically at Section 9 I had that up. See, I lost it again. There we go. The Constitution specifically addresses for cities, towns, that applies to home rule as well. It specifically addresses you can raise these percentages. It wouldn't change at all.
Thank you.
What tend to be some of the challenges from the standpoint of the town for things leading to litigation? What does that tend to cause on the town's standpoint that we have to do?
Okay, from a practical standpoint, there are, as I said, initiative and referendum issues are much lightning rods for litigation. There has been U.S. Supreme Court litigation. There has been state of Colorado Supreme Court litigation. This does not only apply to municipalities, it applies to the state. And at that point, the litigation that is engendered is often, can you get these things on the ballot? Are they challengeable? There's a whole body of litigation from that perspective. There's also a body of litigation surrounding what the heck did we adopt and what's it mean? And you can't go back to the adopting body and get clarification if it was adopted by the voters. There are people who are certainly advocates of the Tabor Amendment, but the Tabor Amendment's a great example. There has been a lot of litigation surrounding what the heck did we mean when we adopted that, and you don't know.
Okay. So is there generally a large cost associated with that litigation from the town standpoint, or no?
Yeah, I mean, any litigation is expensive. Every time you talk to me about litigation, you grab your checkbook and run the other way. It is expensive. Now, there are ways that you can sometimes address issues related to litigation on a more economic basis, but for the most part, it's an expensive process. And it's always going to be. And defining these is an expense. One of the things I should point out is that an initiative and referendum matter cannot be, and this would change perhaps with a home rule, an initiated or referred matter cannot be changed without going back to the voters. So if the voters elect to do something, you have to go back to the voters as a town. As a home rule municipality, one of the things that would change was you can modify your charter to provide that changes can be accomplished or after a certain period of time, for example. And many home rules have done that, and it's held up. So.
Mr. March.
Fire.
I don't know how this applies, and this is my question just for not knowing, but just to clear it up. Does this in any way refer to how many voters would be required as a minimum turnout in order to?
Okay, there's a set number of voters who are registered at the last election. And Crystal can probably define this better because she's more familiar with it. But there's a set number of registered electors that voted in the last election. In this case, 2 elections back, I think it was 7,055.
Sure.
That's your number. And so you're looking back at the last number of electors. So this would change the percentage required of registered electors who would have to sign the petition. But the number would be set before you submitted the petition. Does that answer your question?
So when it goes to the voters, though, is there a minimum turnout?
No, it's a majority can adopt it.
Okay, thank you. That answers my
Sorry, I
question.
didn't understand the question.
That's good. Thanks.
There are, I would point out, for the state, there are higher voting limits, I think, that have been adopted for the Constitution, to change the Constitution, and they amended the Constitution for that reason, but didn't apply to us.
How many of these initiative or referendums have come up in your tenure?
Gosh, I've championed 1 or 2. For the town, for Wellington, I'm not aware of any in the 20 plus years I've been town attorney. This
Okay.
is our first one. But they're becoming much, much more common.
Okay.
As clarification, I asked Brad to bring this to the board in light of the situation we're currently in. One of the things that I had asked him about was I had read a newspaper article that there was an initiative down in Fort Collins a few months back that had the same legal terminology problems, or, it wasn't a legally sound initiative. And excuse me, sorry. The town of Fort Collins apparently has a mechanism where they're able to review the legal language in initiatives, and they can have the initiative changed prior to it going to out for signatures. So I'd asked Brad about that initially, and it seemed like it was a more difficult process. There was a lot more involved in it, and then it turned into the percentages of the voters that needed to be signatures, which makes it, it makes sense to me. And it's also a little bit of an easier process. It's not a long drawn out thing with a lot of ordinances and completely new ordinances and that type of stuff. So that's kind of the background where this came from.
So if there's interest, what I probably need is some direction. First, if you want to pursue this, I can certainly bring something back to the board. I don't know that we would need to set, if you are interested, percentages at this juncture, but certainly to the degree that there's an interest, if you want. Constitutionally, the highest you can go is 10% for a referendum and 15% for an initiative.
Is that something we want to look into?
I would be, I guess, do we have to change both of them, or can we do one or the other?
You can do one or the other.
So I guess from my standpoint, I have more of a concern around the initiative side versus the referendum side. I don't have a problem with the referendum being at 5%, because it's designed to give a recourse to the citizens. If we're making what the citizens feel is an awful, terrible decision, then they have the ability to come back and say, no, we want to have some say on that. I think with the initiative, I think there's a lot more opportunity for things to, because right with the referendum, the law's already passed. We're not gonna run into the legal language problems that we're gonna see with initiatives. So if we were to look at something, I would say leave the referendum alone and just look at potentially raising numbers on the initiative side. That's my standpoint. I can see value in doing that just so that it's a stronger process and that we really are sure that there's a higher percentage of citizens that really do want this. It's not the occasional person on the side of the street not knowing what they signed, that they actually got out and people of the town really do say, yeah, we want to see this and have a vote for it.
If that's where you went, what I would urge you to do is, because we don't have anything in the code, I would probably put something in the code that left referendum at 5 and put initiative at whatever number you wanted.
Just to be crystal clear, this would only apply to initiatives that would be in the future, nothing that is
That's
currently.
absolutely true.
I
Yes,
just want to make sure that the
certainly.
public is aware that that's not in the intention.
yes. Absolutely.
Mr. Marsh, I have a question. I mean, from a standpoint of what do other municipalities do around here, or where have they set the,
I haven't looked, to be honest with
Percentage.
you, Trustee Whitehouse. I can look at that. I'm not familiar with the answer to that, but I can certainly bring that back to the board.
So I just want to make sure that I'm clearly understanding what the intention is that we're trying to improve the quality of the initiatives that are being presented so that they're not just written on a napkin and slid out. Is that kind of what I'm understanding? Is that by requesting that we have a higher voter review or signature, it provides a level of quality control on these initiatives? Is that what we're seeking?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's in my mind. I mean, the other alternative is, sorry, having that ability to review initiatives prior to them going out for signatures for their legal, that they're written in proper legal language and, make perfect sense. But I think that's probably something that would be more problematic than doing just a raising the initiative threshold, wouldn't it, Brad?
I think it would. I mean, there is,
Different things.
as I said, I have not gone to neighboring communities. I did contact CML and for lack of a better term, the low-hanging fruit regarding addressing initiative and referendums seems to be this constitutional provision, because that you're clearly allowed to do. If you go back and you look at the statute, you can adopt other limitations, but it's not as clear as this one. I mean, this one is
I have an important question.
clear.
Do we know how many signatures were on that last initiative?
There was roughly 650 for each one.
650? Okay, because that kind of gives us, a baseline number. So what was the 5, 10, and so 10,
I can get it back for
10% is
you.
about 750, right?
706.
706.
There you go.
So by doing that, are we really making a difference? Because we had the number of voters that would have met the threshold almost.
Even short, yeah.
So
Okay.
maybe the review option is a better way to go.
But also, as the town grows and the number of registered electors grow, that number is going to climb also. So, I mean, using that as a reference is not necessarily,
So I guess what I'm saying is I would be interested in seeing both.
I would be too.
Would that be okay?
I was just, looking at the low hanging fruit,
Yeah.
the low hanging fruit.
I would suggest that one of the things that raising the limit does, and I got this feedback when I was exploring this, one of the things that raising the limit does is it is easy to hand a petition to someone as they're walking into the grocery store and say, sign this quickly. You do get more scrutiny the higher the number. And you do get people who have an ability to come back and say, whoa, have you seen what they're circulating? Where you can, it is very common to hit the community and just in mass with a bunch of circulators. At that point, takes a little more time to get it through the process. And that allows the public to review this a little better and think about what they're signing. At least that was one of the suggestions that was made.
What is the timeline and limit for accepting signatures on a petition?
I'd have to go back and look. Crystal, you've got a better sense than I do. Perhaps you do have a certain time in which you have to have signatures turned back in.
Sorry to catch you off guard. If that's okay.
I believe it's 120 days, but I'm going to double check on that.
Okay.
I think it sounds right.
And we
Well-
could put it to 15, which would have taken that limit to 1,059.
Okay. I have a couple mixed thoughts on this. So the first one, I agree. If someone's coming with a petition, they'd have to be more organized and ready, clear language in order to accomplish 3 times as much as before in the same designated period of time, whatever that period of time might be. It's 3 times as much in that period. So I agree that that will likely bring better measures to us, better initiatives, excuse me. I know that when we have the litigation that's involved in our current situation, it's extremely expensive. So the cost to our voters is impacted significantly for litigation. So that's something, of course, I'd like to avoid at all costs as well. The other side of the argument that I have is that I hate to make it harder for initiatives from our citizens to come to our voters. So I can see both sides of it. I can see the benefits. But when we keep in mind when it's initiative from the citizens, it still requires a legal team and significant work from that organization in order to bring it to voters. And the harder we make it, the less access to our regular voters to do and participate in this process. It might limit their thoughts and their actions. So I see both sides of it, and I understand. In my mind, if there was a compelling initiative, the signatures would easily come. But I just would hate to limit the access to our citizens for a citizen initiative. So I just have concerns both ways. But of course, saving money for our voters is also important, which is involved with the litigation that we're seeing now. We're likely seeing in the future of any kind of citizen initiative, just based on the nature of the difficulty of complying to the laws. So no answer there. Those are just my thoughts.
Would it be possible to put together an estimate of what the potential costs to the town would be in case of if we had something go to litigation, or just even if it weren't, what would the cost be to the voters if we were to have this initiative? So basically that we can look at and say, because that's, I would agree with Trustee Kinney, a lot of my concern is at the cost of the taxpayers, right? Because if we're needing to put 20, now granted, it's good to know this is the first time this has ever happened. So it's not like this is happening every other year. So that's a good thing. But if this is becoming more common, if we're having to set aside 40, 50, 60, $100,000 a year in our town budget to potentially, do an initiative, that then I think becomes a question of, okay, is this what we should be doing with the taxpayer dollars? Are we becoming something of mob rule? That's part of the point of people electing us, right? Is to go and enact the policies that they want to see done in the town. But would it be possible to put together basically what would the potential cost be so that we could measure that and say, and maybe even sit down and talk to the citizens and say, hey, what do you think? Would you prefer to pay potentially higher taxes or have more of your tax dollars being set aside for potential litigation in this? Or are you okay with having to work a little bit harder if there's something that you want to bring forward to have done without the board?
No, there's not.
Okay.
And let me tell you why.
Sure.
I mean, that was a flip answer. There are initiative and referendum matters have become something that there are attorneys that deal with nothing but initiatives and referendums. The extreme nature of the litigation or of any litigation, you can't project what it would be. One of the problems that or an example of a problem you can come up with is you can have somebody who initiates a matter and someone then who turns around and initiates a contrary matter under the statute. And that's become something people do. There are abilities to challenge the initiative in some levels. There's some levels that go to court. In the case that we've seen 3 separate lawsuits filed, which perhaps is extreme, perhaps isn't. If the case is settled at the district court and the parties decide that they're going to give this up, great. If it goes to the Supreme Court, obviously that's a much more expensive venture. You could spend $100,000 playing with these things. We've tried to keep the costs relatively low. And to their credit, the parties initiated it have been fairly cooperative, and we've tried to work through solutions. But that's not always the case.
Thank you.
Well, I do have this is Trustee Whitehouse. I do have a comment. I mean, I'm not entirely sure about what is required for the review, but obviously, again, 3 court cases ongoing, well, 2 ongoing, but what is the cost to review it and make sure the legal aspects are correct as opposed to not doing that? Now, obviously, Trustee Jerome is a little better, understands this a little better, but it seems like that's a little higher bar. But, looking at what the potential is, I mean, is that not a reasonable way to go? And I guess my perspective is similar to that of Trustee McDonald, that maybe we could see the pluses and minuses, or what might be required to do some sort of legal review of initiative before it gets sent to the public, just to make sure it lines up with the existing statutes.
That is reasonable, and certainly that can be done. Obviously, that's one of the things when you get to court that the court's doing. And so at that juncture, there's various times you can take things to the courts to review things. But for the most part, there's case law that suggests you can't take an initiated matter to the court until after it has been approved, because otherwise the court, almost by definition, is looking at that initiated matter to determine something that may not get adopted. And so there's a thought the court's wasting its time. Certainly, we may be in a position that we could say that the town attorney has to review, or somebody has to review this for legal compliance. From that perspective, that's going to be subject to debate. Obviously, if it gets thrown out, we may see repeated action. Let me see if I can come up with some language on that. The other thing we may want to look at, and I again defer to the clerk, but we may want to look at the potential of extending the time to review an initiative, because it's a fairly short window after it's received. And that may be something, obviously we don't have as clear a statement in the law that we do it's contained in the Constitution on percentages, but we could also look at that issue. So let me see if I can get you some more information back if there's some interest.
I'm especially interested in extending the review period.
Let me look at it. And that's a question. There are no cases on it. I don't know if other municipalities have done that or not. And so I'll do some looking.
A clarification on the review period, that means the time that the initiative is turned into the clerk, and the clerk has the opportunity to review and any other legal review.
Yes.
It's okay. I just
That's a
wanna make sure which-
sufficiency question.
And then as far as the percentages, I mean, we have a couple of folks on staff that have worked in other municipalities. Can either you enlighten us on your past work experiences, what the percentages were for initiatives?
So I was trying hard to remember, and I believe it's around 10%
Okay.
that I remember for citizen initiatives. The one thing I can speak to, though, is it hasn't seemed to change the quality of the citizen initiative that's being submitted based on the number of signatures that are required. I've not seen that. So if that's what you're looking for, I think we need to potentially look at the option to have legal review of that before it goes out for signatures or before we approve it as to form. submitted, and currently am involved in 2 lawsuits with the city of Loveland, who hasn't had a whole lot of lawsuits over elections. So I know that that's something that's definitely on the radar right now, as Brad mentioned. So I know in Windsor, we had our attorney there did review citizen initiatives, and we worked, if the proponents wanted to have us work with them to come up to clean up language and things like that, we did provide that, although we were home rule, so I don't know if that makes any difference. So that was definitely something we offered. And so when, citizen initiatives went out for the vote, or for signatures and to be voted upon, they were clean and something that the town could, was amenable to.
And I would suggest, and we'll just take the current initiative, I think the town would have been very willing to review the citizen initiative. I think the board would have been willing to review the citizen initiative. That was not an option that was afforded to the town. This was submitted and given to the clerk, as I understand it, and said, we want your ruling within such and such a time, whether this is compliant. And those legal rulings or legal determinations are not going to be something that are going to be, that's going to be a subjective determination that's ultimately going to have to be made by the court. I don't know, I'm a little hesitant to suggest that it's a good idea, but I'll certainly do some research and see if I can find some other towns that have done it. I'm not sure that I'm particularly comfortable with the ability, and I'll check with Fort Collins specifically and talk with Carrie Daggett, who's their city attorney. I kind of question whether or not they were reviewing the legal substance, but they may have been, and I'll double check it.
And like I said, I just read that there was an article in the Colorado about it. So that's what perked my interest. And I also looked it up, and I do know that the state, whenever there's something initiated that comes to the state, it does have to go through a review process of some sort. Not necessarily all the language, but I believe that they make sure that it matches up to any current statutes or it doesn't violate any current constitutional laws or whatever. So
That's true.
I guess that's just the biggest thing is, think about it. Initiatives, once if they're taken to the voters and they are passed, this board and the future residents of the town, the only way they can do anything to change it to match the current situation of the town is to go back and do a vote on it again, which in my mind it kind of defeats the whole purpose of the people, by the people, for the people. This town, obviously we've talked about, this town could grow to 35,000 people in the next 20 years. So if there was an initiative that was passed today that caused huge problems 10 years down the road, it'd be a lot of work to try to get that changed in order for the town to move forward. I don't know what that would be, but I'm just saying that, with the board's hands tied, future residents, their hands are almost tied too, and being able to make adjustments going down the road for what the town looks like at that particular point.
Very
So,
true.
Agreed.
What I would probably suggest is a draft that said, and again, and I don't know that certainly there were flaws in the ordinance that was initiated. You could track it through the law. When it was referred to the judge before it went to the voters, the municipal judge, she made various findings, including that it was administrative in nature. That's a very complex area of the law that is difficult to determine. We could have certainly made that determination out of the gate. I would suggest that determination, together with compliance with all laws, together with perhaps a few other things, ought to be set at that stage as a review, as opposed to, and perhaps also at the initial review. But I think it's better presented before the municipal judge, which is what we did before. And I think that's first off more defensible, but I think it's also much fairer from the perspective of the citizenry, as you point out. And I think that is probably the better answer. So let me see if I can put something together that follows that course. And if you guys want, I'll try and give you some options.
Yeah, at least some kind of review that highlights any red flags, save money for both parties in litigation.
Understood.
Do you have any questions about your direction?
No, ma'am. I think I got it. I think I'll try and get you some stuff. It may be a couple meetings, but we'll get you some. Okay.
Thank you. I think that was a really great conversation for us to have.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate the presentation. It cleared everything, any questions that I had about all this stuff too. So thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, that was our last item. Is there anything additional? We're good?
When's our next meeting?
Next Tuesday?
Thank you.
Monday.
Yes.
There's a reason why I
Good
asked.
call, good call.
I'm
All right.
sorry, so Monday?
We're here at
At 4:30.
4:30. Okay.
All right. Nothing else? Adjourn.
You scared me with that one.
Hey, you told me.
I know.
You told me to use it.